Hi everyone, so it's me again, Bromor. I'm back here at Toronto Comicon, and I'm here for CFAC 883 and my program, Maraz Academia, and I have the immense privilege of being with Larry Hancock and Michael Cherkas. First of all, Larry, I know him, fun fact, from 2021 when he came to Fan Expo Canada, and what was the name of the panel again?
I was regularly doing a panel called "Is It Time to Sell Your Collectibles?"
And I wrote an article covering that panel, and it did pretty well. And there were a lot of mixed opinions, let's say, on whether Larry was right or wrong, and selling on eBay and auctions and so on. But we're not here to talk about that today, maybe a little bit. And then we have Michael Cherkas, who wrote us Red Harvest. So,
There you
Michael,
go.
maybe we can start with that. What is Red Harvest?
Red Harvest is a graphic novel, fictional history graphic novel about the Holodomor, the man-made famine in Ukraine from 1933. It's a heartbreaking story that could make you cry. So,
And Larry, Silent Invasion.
Yep.
What is it about?
So Michael and I have been working on the Silent Invasion for quite some time, on and off. The Silent Invasion I describe as UFOs, paranoia, government conspiracies, alien invasion. Or it could be, at the beginning, one reporter's sad delusions. Michael.
we used to describe it as a science fiction mystery thriller. In the shortest, that was a short 3-word description of it.
Yeah, but you now like to call it a documentary.
Well, it might be based on what's going on in the world now, because it's heavily based on conspiracy theory.
Yeah. So the Silent Invasion has grown over time. We originally started with a 12-issue comic book series from Renegade Press back in 1986 to 1988, and we did another comic book series later on, and those have all been collected in graphic novels. And then in 2018, we did a brand new book, which has never appeared in comic book form before. In 1986, Amazing Heroes magazine chose us as one of the 10 best comic books of the year. That year, the list included Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, Love and Rockets, Frank Miller's Daredevil. We were only number 10 on the list, but it was a pretty good list to be on. And we were nominated for the Jack Kirby Award for Best Black and White Series. So we had some acclaim right from the beginning.
I don't have the opportunity to come to Toronto often, but we're here in Toronto today, and you're Toronto locals. Jacob, yesterday, who's behind the camera today, he dragged me to the Toronto Public Library. It's not like I didn't want to go, but I was quite tired. But he's like, no, you have to see this. So Jacob, what did you have a chance to see yesterday?
So yesterday we went to 2 exhibitions within the Osborne collection, as well as the Merrill collection. Merrill is what we'll talk about today. It's mostly the sci-fi, and let's just talk about it right away. How did it start? Because we know that it once had its own sci-fi permanent status on Beverly Street, but then it moved on to college. Was it just due to space? Was there more history behind it than that?
Well, the Merrill Collection, the full name, is the Merrill Collection of Science Fiction, Speculation, and Fantasy. It began with a donation by Judith Merrill, the well-known science fiction author and anthologist, of her personal collection. And at one point, as you say, it was on Beverly Street, but the library needed that location in order to basically for the U of T to expand. And so the library was going to close that. Just close the library and put it in the boxes. But Judith managed to rally a bunch of local science fiction fans, and we became the Friends of the Merrill Collection, a group that was dedicated to the preservation and expansion of the Merrill Collection. And over the years, we were very successful indeed in helping them to find a new building. So the Merrill Collection is a non-lending library, but it has got vast resources of science fiction books, music, artwork, and as we've talked about, pulp magazines as well.
And we can talk about pulps.
Yeah, go ahead. You do it.
So basically, we saw some pulps, particularly from the 50s, that the that was probably one of the heydays of it. You know, we saw it from like '59. Just talk about that in general. Like, did that inspire the Pulp Fiction movie? How did that sort of work together in the science fiction movie?
Well, certainly Tarantino picked up on the Pulp Fiction, the cheap, quick stories that were published in the pulp magazines for the title of his movie. But the pulp magazines were a slow evolution back in the 20s and everything. It was a way to publish cheap literature because pulp comes from the word pulp, meaning the pulp that you print paper on. The pulp magazines were printed on very cheap paper.
They were printed on the worst quality paper
because they were meant to be throwaways. But this is where a lot of great authors got their start. Edgar Rice Burroughs' stories were originally published there. Any number of authors were published there, and it gave birth. And all the great pulp heroes. It was not only were there westerns and romances and a bit of space, but there were all the heroes or the anti-heroes, the Shadow, the Spider, Operator 5, all those. They were very big at that time, and they were generally published on a weekly basis. So the authors at that point in time weren't paid very much per word, but they churned out the material, and some of it ended up being quite good. And from that gave birth to Amazing Heroes, Amazing Magazine, edited eventually by John Campbell and other competitors in that. And that was really Hugo Gerns back in the beginning, my mistake. But that gave birth basically to the science fiction field, with starting in the pulps and then growing into better quality magazines.
Michael, getting back to you, so Red Harvest is about the
Ukrainian famine.
Ukraine,
Yeah.
and the Holodomor.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was important to write on that subject?
Probably because not a lot of people know about it, and it's fairly well known within the Ukrainian community, but it was never really well known outside of the Ukrainian community. But the thing about it is famines in general. They happen all over the world, right? And and a lot of them are man-made. The Ukrainian famine isn't the only one that was man-made, but at the same time the Ukrainian famine was going on, there was a big famine in Kazakhstan caused by the same Soviet policies. There was a famine in India in World War II that could have been alleviated, but Winston Churchill decided not to send food aid. There was the Irish potato famine, which again the English decided we're not going to send any help to the Irish to alleviate the famine. There was I think in wasn't there a famine in Rwanda? Oh, there was a big thing in genocide in Rwanda, but I don't know. Was there a famine there too?
No, it wasn't a famine as far as I know in Rwanda. I mean, it was
tribal.
It was tribal.
It was tribal, yeah.
It wasn't a famine, yeah.
But anyway, so I think the main thing about it is to just make it accessible to people that don't know about it, because there are a lot of academic histories of the Ukrainian famine, but a lot of academic histories aren't really, once you start reading them, your eyes kind of glaze over because they're filled with a lot of statistics, right? And so my book isn't about statistics. It's about the struggle of one family in a small village of trying to come to terms with these events that are being imposed upon them from either governments in Kharkiv, because that was the capital of Ukraine at the time, or Moscow. And so it's about the farmer's struggle to survive.
I think that's why I think that the way that you approach it in Red Harvest is really interesting and informative, because from the perspective of like the farmer, because to this day there are a lot of groups who are like adjacent to communists and so on, who still defend the Soviet policy on Ukraine, and who say that, oh no, the Holodomor, it was like made up by like capitalists and the bourgeois.
I know.
And they say it's because the Soviet Ukraine government, like, they wanted to crack down on the kulaks, and the farmers were hoarding food and so on. And there's a lot of revisionist history around what went on down there. How do you see it as someone who's documented this?
It's kind of a, if you're talking to people that are supporting the Soviet version of history, it's like banging your head against the wall, because they will constantly spout the Soviet side of the story. At the same time, that because when you get right back to the famine itself, they're correct to say there was starvation in other parts of the Soviet Union, but where they are wrong is that after 1930, November of 1932, the Soviet authorities imposed a blacklist on Ukrainian villages where nothing could get in or nothing could go out. Whereas that blacklist was not imposed on Russian villages or Belarusian villages. It was Ukrainian villages. And if you look at the anecdotal history, the story of survivors, where did they go to try to find food? Russia, because there was no food in Ukraine because it had been taken away. There are stories of survivors who walked hundreds of kilometers into Russia to get food. So when they're talking about it, saying no, Ukrainians weren't targeted, it's completely false. There's a part of that's now part of Russia. There's this area called the Kuban. Kuban was originally settled by Ukrainians in the 1700s. The Kuban was one of the targeted regions. They were also, even though it was part of the Russian Socialist Federated Republic, the Ukrainians in the Kuban were as targeted as well. So it was a targeted genocide by Stalin, because he was afraid of that Ukraine was going to separate.
I mean, we're talking about the Soviet narrative, and now there's the Russian narrative, which instead of being like a socialist one, is a nationalist one, which is that the Ukrainians are part of like the same greater Russian civilization, or like the Novorossiya, what they call.
Yeah.
As a Ukraine, I mean, there's a huge Ukrainian community in Canada, as you know, and Christopher Phelan is part of that community, for example. How do you feel about that concept of Novorossiya?
It doesn't exist. It only exists in a Russian mind. So it's not a. Ukrainians have always known that they're not Russian. Before the terms Russia and Ukraine became common usage, Ukrainians used to refer to Russians as Moskals. They were not Russian. The whole idea of the Russian world is that Ruski Mir is kind of crazy, because they actually didn't adopt the term Russia until after Peter the Great. Peter the Great is the one who decided to call Moscow Russia. So
in terms of just how we're seeing the war play out, just the history of Ukraine in general, we've seen it through multiple methods. We've seen it on the news, we've seen it on media, we've seen it in books, we've seen it on social media. What is it about the graphic novel and the book method itself that sort of is such a great medium, and why do you think that's such an effective way of sharing history, sharing stories of a historical nature?
graphic novels are an easy way for people who don't have a lot of knowledge about specific areas to get into a story. I think it's the whole notion. And we had somebody at our table talking about it earlier, about kids reading graphic novels, and as he was a former teacher, and he said, the old adage is a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So in a graphic novel, you're trying to convey situations with an image that you can just look at, but a writer can spend 2 pages describing that scene. Some people don't want to wade through 2 or 3 pages of descriptive dialogue. Actually, I know one of my best friends had this condition that I don't know what it's called, but you can't picture things, and it's very common. A number of people have it, where they actually cannot, if they're reading a description, they cannot visualize what is being described. And his example, he said, I know what my mother looked like, And when I see her, I know what she looks like, and I recognize her. But when I'm out of the room, I can't picture of her in my head. So, but one out of every, I wish I knew what the name of that condition was. Larry, do you know?
I don't know. But I will say the graphic novel format makes the material a lot more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing. It makes difficult subjects more accessible. And once they've read a graphic novel that doesn't really get into deep detail, they might become interested in that subject.
So basically, what is heard and understood is that photo literacy is almost equivalent to reading literacy.
Yeah.
In the sense that in order to analyze a photo, you need to pay attention. Sometimes it may take longer looking at a photo than even just reading a book or looking at a piece of art.
Yeah.
It may take longer just examining it rather than just reading 2 pages or whatever and then moving on.
Well, actually, a good example of that is looking at photos or images can be mentally exhausting. If I go to an art gallery, I'm done in an hour and a half. I've got to find the painting image that I really like and look at that for a long time. Because I find if you're in an art gallery for 5 hours, you get the eyes glazed over. Like you're like one eye's going over that.
I know the feeling. I've done a whole day at the Prado in Madrid.
Yeah.
No photos are even allowed in here. So
Yeah.
you really have to do it old school. But it's just in terms of the art of history, we don't see that very often now. We just see we see manga, we'll see just other forms of comics or graphic novels. But historical graphic novel format, is that going to be on the rise now as we're seeing in more news events and trying to educate the young?
I think it is, yeah.
We're going to see more of that in other formats, other world news events. It doesn't have to necessarily be historical. It could be history, but it could be a current event. It's shown through the
Well, a good example of that is after this book came out and I'm talking to Ukrainian readers from Ukraine, they'll say to me, "Are you going to do one about the war?" And I go, I told them, I'm not really going to do one about the war because there's a vibrant graphic novel scene in Ukraine, and they're going to do their own graphic novels, and they're experiencing it firsthand. It's not. I don't think I could really tell that story.
No, you wouldn't do a full story, but we did do a short story set at the beginning of the current conflict. And this story was done for a fundraiser.
Open it like this.
And the anthology won the Eisner Award for Best Graphic Anthology at the Eisner Awards a couple of years ago. And our short story was nominated for Best Short Story, a graphic short story, but unfortunately we did not win. But this also was a story which it's similar to what you were talking about. It's primarily set as a conversation between a woman who's living in Kiev and her mother's living in Moscow, and the mother believing the propaganda and the daughter trying to convince her that, here's what's real. Here's what's really happening.
And to this day, you two are still, in the scene. Purple Ray. This is something you wanted to highlight.
Larry, highlight it.
So the Purple Ray is the latest thing we're working on, and it's our first foray into full color, which you can tell from the back. But actually, Michael chose a limited palette to tell this story effectively. The Purple Ray is going to be a full graphic novel, and eventually, we're a little slow at working this time. But the Purple Ray is about a character who is the only person who ever had superpowers in his world. He no longer has them.
Unlike our world, where there's millions of superheroes.
Actually, yep. Now, I can describe, the first issue takes place at a convention just like this, where he's being largely ignored, while all the people who work on the comic book and everything based on him are getting lots of attention. The story is really about the fact that this is a character who sold his rights at the very beginning, and now he is restricted by the comic book company in regards to how he can live his life. And he really wants to get his life and liberty back, especially since he still gets paid a paltry sum of money.
They never raised the retainer rate.
No. So, you know, there's analogies to the Superman story of Siegel and Schuster. And we bring in a lot of other analogies of various things to the comic book companies over the years. By the time we get the whole thing finished, it's going to be wonderful. It'll be a Netflix 10-part series. It'll be...
Maybe. Jacob, any final questions?
Just talking more about the, I guess, this TV online method. Are there any plans or any ideas besides you said that, hey, is there having your content onto the video format?
The thing is that we're old fogies. And so we don't necessarily think as quick on our feet as we should. We do need to find a way to get our stuff out there on a monthly basis to people, which would encourage us to do our work more quickly. We have had the silent invasion optioned in the past, and we had numerous people ask about free options. Never give away a free option. You know, we got to put a bit of money in our pockets, but nothing ever came of it.
It's been spent on cases of beer.
But, you know, quite frankly, we're open to anybody who wants to help to exploit our rights. But we're not at this point in time in a need to. So when the right deal comes along, but at the moment, we're happy where we stand, except we need to just keep producing some more material.
Well, thank you very much, you two, for the interview.
Thank you.
It was very interesting to talk to such long-time experienced figures.
Well, you're very welcome. We've been doing this for a long time, but the advice we give everybody when they talk about getting into comics
Keep
is
a day job.
keep your day job. Get a good day job. I do this in the evenings. I'm a professional accountant.
Yeah, I saw a CPA.
Yeah. And Michael does graphic design and illustration. Now we're both older. We're both trying to wind down that. And that will hopefully give us more time to work on all the creative stuff so that all the 14 people who enjoy it will be able to enjoy it more.
I thought it's 15.
No, one of them died.
Oh.
Oh my goodness. Well, you know what? You're invited at Comicon, so you're definitely on the right track.
Terrific. Okay. Well, we
Thanks.
very much enjoyed this.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.